Memories of a Vinyl Junkie 1974. What a frigging year. Bob Dylan, George Harrison, Patty Hearst, Virginity. A lot of music, a lot of shows, college radio. And this album came out. Manhole by Grace Slick. Oh my God. There's a lot of records I'm going to show here. Some of them I'm just going to go through, fairly quickly. Some mean so much to me now. Pretty much every record that you see here are records that I got in the day. Maybe not these exact copies, but in 1973, I'd got my first job in a record store at the Warehouse Records, which is a California chain. Not a real hip chain, but they were a good chain. At least I got my foot in the door. And in 1974, late 74, I switched to another locally hipper chain called the Record Factory. I was thinking about this year, and so much happened in this year, personally, internationally, that I have to talk about. 1974 was the year of Watergate. 73, 74 was the year of Watergate. August of 74, Richard Nixon would resign. In 1974, in February 1974, the heiress Patricia Patty Hearst was kidnapped, and she actually is a part of this story indirectly, and part of my year, 1974. I was in college at San Francisco State. I was in the broadcast communication arts, emphasizing in audio recording, and I was on the radio station at San Francisco State. And later in this year, 1974, I would become the program director of the San Francisco State radio station. But let's talk about music first. Working at the Warehouse, this is the first Dylan album that came out when I was working in the record business, and this is Planet Waves. Bob Dylan's first album released on the Asylum record when he left Columbia. Columbia did put out, though, that year, which I don't have here, the Dylan album, which had some covers and outtakes and things from previous. I think Dylan was not a big fan of that. It was kind of a contractual release. But this album came out, and they announced a huge tour of Bob Dylan and the band, a Bill Graham produced tour, and luckily I got tickets for it. And that was in February 1964 at the Oakland Coliseum. This is the resulting record that came out later in the year, Before the Flood, Bob Dylan and the band, and fabulous live record. And this was the first time I saw Bob Dylan, and was a great show, Oakland Coliseum. So right here, you're going to see some photographs that I took of Bob Dylan at this show, because throughout 72, 73, I was bringing my camera to Winterland mostly, and to some of these shows when it wasn't an issue to bring a camera. Now, for those of you photo buffs, I used a Mamiya Secor 35mm camera, usually with a 200mm lens, and I used a GAF or an AGFA 500 film, I think I pushed it to 1,000, maybe even more. So it was very grainy with a long lens and pushing film. This is very technical shit that probably some of you other people don't care for. And then the images here I transferred later as I scanned them years later into black and white, because I prefer black and white for these. But anyway, Dylan and the band, Oakland Coliseum, 1974. Memories of a Vinyl Junkie, 1974, an ongoing series. such a wonderful show. It was really just a tight show. Dylan really rocked doing these songs. You go up your way, I go mine. 1974 was the year I was going out with Catherine, and Catherine was so dear to me. I was that year 19 years old and turned 20 years old in August of that year. So 19, 20 years old, working in a record store, going to college at San Francisco State University. I was still living at home in the first half of the year, and later at the end of the year, I would move out into my first apartment. I think it was late 74, very early 75. And the apartment I moved into would be a block from the record store I worked at, the Record Factory. So I think that was early 75 I moved in there. But Catherine and I just had a great time. And to this day, all these years, almost 50 years later, 46 years later, this is 2020 when I'm recording this video, Catherine and I would continue to be really wonderful friends. And there are some records that were very meaningful to the two of us. And a lot of the records that came out, or a handful of records that came out during 1974, I was able to get promo copies of. Because working in record stores, they paid you shit, but you got free concerts, free shows, or cheap shows sometimes, free drinks at some of the shows. And I'd frequent places like the Boarding House on Bush Street that had a lot of roots music and new wave later on. And Winterland, of course, Oakland Coliseum for the larger shows, and Berkeley Community Theater. One of the artists that I really loved was Boz Scaggs. Now, this is the original version of Boz Scaggs' album, Annie Leibovitz shot. A lot of people did not like this cover. This record has a great blue-eyed soul Philly sound. Johnny Bristol, I believe, produced this record. And there's strings, and it's a fantastic record. And this is the record that would come out before Silk Degrees, which would be his monster breakthrough. But I think this is an amazing record. But we had Catherine and I had a song on this, Slow Dancer. Slow Dancer was kind of one of our songs that we loved. And this is the cover they changed out once Silk Degrees came out. They kind of classed it up. And this is a picture of Boz Scaggs with his wife at the time, Carmela Scaggs. I have a poster of this because this was from a show at the Oakland Paramount Theater, a beautiful, ornate Art Deco theater that was refurbished in the early 70s. And it became this wonderful palace for the symphony and for rock shows. And this is one of the first rock shows possibly. It was black tie only, or black tie optional. So all the hippies and post-hippies and hipsters would dress up in their version of black tie and see Boz Scaggs and band. And so they changed the cover. Fabulous concert. Catherine and I went to this all decked out. And it was just one of those great nights, being 20 years old, 19 years old probably, and going to that. And also, that same year, this album came out. The Pointer Sisters were a local entity that had huge hits with one of their albums. So they became known, obviously. This was produced by David Rubinson, as I recall. Yeah, David Rubinson and Friends, San Francisco. What's great about this, it's an R&B with a sort of a retro album, almost like Lambert Hendricks and Ross, pop jazz, but it's got Bangin' on the Pipe, Steam Heat, a Benny Goodman Cohen tune, Salt Peanuts, a Dizzy Gillespie, Kenny Clark tune from the 40s, I believe, early 50s, I think the 40s. Shake Flat Blues, that's an original, That's a Plenty, Fairy Tale, which is a wonderful song, a Gamble and Huff song, Love in Them Their Hills. So it's a soulful, retro jazzy album, incredible record. And they also did, I think this was the second of the black tie optional at the San Francisco Opera House on Van Ness Avenue. And Catherine and I went to see this show. But love the first two Pointer Sisters records that's on Blue Thumb Records, and I love that. Another great thing about 1974, being in college, working at the Warehouse Records, I realized that year was so special because I met some of the closest friends that would be lifelong friends. Catherine, into 73, but into 74. We were young and in love. My good friend Coleman, who to this day is a friend, just so dear to my heart and so close to me. We met working at the Warehouse Records because he used to come in and we used to talk about the Jefferson Airplane. And then we hired him for Christmas time as an extra help, and he stayed on. So this would have been actually end of 73 that I met him, but we became good friends throughout 74. And Brooks, and if you watch my channel, my other videos, Jazz Shit Brooks, who I'd later become, he'd be my first roommate. Brooks went to San Francisco State, and we both met working at in the broadcasting department. He's from Santa Barbara. We became good friends, roommates. If you watch my 1978 video, him and I went to Europe after we graduated from San Francisco State. And he would work with me also in 74 at the record factory. So very incestuous friendship, but to this day, Brooks and Coleman and Catherine are extremely, they're my family. They're some of the closest people in my life. Coleman and I had such a blast at the Warehouse, some hysterical stories. Some I can go into and some I can't, obviously. But certain records we'd play and just crack up. And obviously, Frank Zappa's Apostrophe, especially the opening suite of Don't Eat the Yellow Snow, Nanak Rubs It, St. Alfonso's Pancake Breakfast, Father Oblivion, and Cosmic Debris. What a great record this was. A little bit of a breakout, semi-commercial success for Zappa, who wasn't really the ultimate commercial artist. But this record, some Monty Python double grooved records were amongst our favorites. And a band also came along. And Coleman and I didn't really play them. I didn't right away. And that year at the Eurovision Song Contest, if you're Europeans, a lot of Americans don't know about this, but the band and the song that won the Eurovision Song Contest in 1974 was ABBA and Waterloo. And I remember hearing this record and liking it. It was very upbeat pop. You all know ABBA now. We all know ABBA now. And people either love or hate them. I love them. Coleman is a huge, huge fan of ABBA. So I would get into it too. We'd play this. Fortunately, Coleman and I think later in 1978, their only tour of America, Coleman and I went together to see ABBA at the Concord Pavilion. So I'm so glad I saw ABBA, the ABBA movie, obviously. In 78, I saw in the United Kingdom at Oxford University, which is kind of interesting. But this was their original album that was huge all over Europe. It kind of made some noise in the States, but it wasn't really, they weren't really as popular here until many years later. So, of course, I was a big Kinks fan. And two records here, one from 73 because it leads into 74. Didn't get a lot of love, but I remember playing these two records at the Warehouse in store quite a bit. The Kinks, Preservation All Act 1. I love this record. I love the opening of this record, Morning Song, which is just a wonderful song. It goes into daylight. This is a beautiful record, Sitting in the Midday Sun. And then Preservation Act 2, two-record set. Love this. Saw them in concert. Have pictures of them in concert in, I guess it was 73, when I took the pictures that you may or may not see in this video. I should probably show them. So you want to see Kinks pictures? It might be blending over 73, 74. I think it's more 73, but it's the Kinks. And the opening act was Dan Hicks and the Hot Licks, and it was their farewell tour. And they played 2 nights, and I went both nights. Always been a Kinks fan, even though everyone loves a Reprise and Pie 60s output. I love their RCA work. I love all the Kinks, or most of the Kinks. So let's check that out right now.
Once under a scarlet sky, I told you never-ending lies, but they were the words of a drunken vagabond who knew very well he would break your heart before long.
shows were $4 or $5, if that. Yeah, $4 or $5. Plus, we'd get tickets from labels. Again, the boarding house. One of the shows I remember in that year going. In fact, the Grateful Dead had been a fan of. Had first seen them in '68 in San Francisco, Lonely Park when I was young, and free shows, and saw them. New Year's Eve. 71, 72 could go to Winterland. They would be the band that would play the New Year's Eve shows. And it was such a great experience to see the Grateful Dead live. And, the motto you always hear, there's nothing like a Grateful Dead concert, is absolutely, totally true. I'm a deadhead to a point. I'm not an absolute that I have to go to every show. I don't travel around following them, but I continue to buy their records. And in 74, they put out this Mars Hotel, which was the second record on their own label after leaving Warner Brothers, Grateful Dead Records. And this is an original copy from Grateful Dead Records from 1974. The Mars Hotel was an old sort of derelict resident hotel on 4th Street in San Francisco, right where Moscone Convention Center is now, right across from it, the new area of it. Actually across the street from it on 4th Street. I remember one day Catherine was working, had a job for a while that was working downtown. I would drive her. That's when I had my 1972 Ford Pinto, and she was early. We were sitting in the car for a while talking or whatever we were doing, making out or something. And literally we were parked right across the street from the Mars Hotel. So that was an area before they built the convention center. So south of Market, Yerba Buena Center, they called it, was really a lot of empty land that hadn't been built on yet, that was ready to go through redevelopment. This was eventually torn down. I love this cover. This record I like a lot too. Scarlet Begonias, Ship of Fools, U.S. Blues, and China Doll became sort of an ongoing live staple for the Grateful Dead, obviously. And they did a series of Winterland concerts, and I can't remember if it was 4 or 5 nights. I went to 2 of the nights. However, one of the nights I went with Catherine, and she had never been to a Grateful Dead concert before. And I think after about 90 minutes, she was yawning. So about 2 hours in, we left. We went to her place. There's other stories like that, but hey, she came around years later after we broke up. But I went to the next night with a buddy of mine, and of course stayed for the whole 4 hours, 5 hours, whatever it was. But Grateful Dead, just keeping with some local bands, records that came out in 1974, Tower of Power, back to Oakland. Great shot of the Oakland, San Francisco Bay Bridge. And this has Oakland Stroke, Just When We Started Making It, Don't Change Horses, Time Will Tell. They were such a great funky band. I actually, my freshman year in high school, I went to high school with Greg Adams. He didn't know him, but I saw him play around. I was a freshman, and Greg Adams, the trumpet player in Tower Power, was a senior. So I'd see Tower Power a lot playing around the Bay Area, and they've always been a great funky band. Their first record was an independent San Francisco, on a San Francisco label, Something in the Sand, and I'm blanking out right now. What a great band. And they were unusual they weren't obviously the psychedelic bands, but they were a 70s band of the Bay Area that became extremely successful on Warner Brothers Records. And another local band that I saw quite a bit around the Bay Area, and that was Santana. This is the Caravanserai tour, as I recall. Now this record initially never came out in United States. This is the Japanese version, Lotus. It's a 3-record set with an amazing origami-like cover that folds out in so many ways. I'm not going to fold it out now because it literally is too massive. It finally came out on compact disc in this country, but it has, again, Japanese wonderful origami design. I do actually, years later in the 80s, one of my photographers did a photo shoot of Carlos Santana, and he came to the shoot, and I brought my copy of Lotus. I should have brought the vinyl, but for some reason I brought this CD, and Carlos signed my CD copy. So it's great. This is an amazing live album, very jazzy. If you know Caravanserai, it's got that, I think it's the last thing, Michael Shreve, their drummer, so it's got the last remnants of the original Santana band. Not all of them, but really, really great sounding record and a favorite of mine. And another local artist that put out several records this year, and Weed and Fleece by Van Morrison was the album that came out in '74. Back a little bit to his Irish roots. This is a record that didn't do super well when it came out, but it became a big record in his catalog and discography for fans of Van Morrison many years later because of, Country Fair, Cul-de-sac, Comfort, Come Here My Love, You Don't Pull No Punches, but You Don't Push the River. Self-produced record, which is a beautiful, gorgeous record. But I got into this record a little bit at the time. Obviously, I like it much more now. But the record I really love is this. This was a double album. There's an expanded record store day, 3-record set that has all the shows. This is from a '74 tour. And it's really great. It's got a string section with him, and it's just one of the fabulous live records. He does a lot of his hits, including Gloria from them. This is recorded in Los Angeles and London, summer '73, but came out in '74. I saw Van Morrison probably 3 or 4 times, starting in '72, I believe, '71 or '72, through about '75. He lived in the Bay Area. One of the great things, years later when I worked in '78, for ABC Records, one of my accounts in San Anselmo, which is Marin County, was Caledonia Music, a small mom and pop record shop, literally mom and pop. It was run by Van Morrison's parents. Van Morrison lived in Marin County. San Anselmo was a store where he bought this record store for his parents and brought them over from Ireland. And I used to service that store and go to them and we'd talk. They'd always had a big poster of Van Morrison in their shop. Another record that wasn't actually well received when it came out. Everyone loves this record. This is like the, oh my God, on the beach, we love this record. And it was hard to get for a number of years in the last 10 years during the vinyl resurgence until he did some Neil Young archive reissues of it. This is the album that came out 2 years after Harvest and a follow-up to Harvest. And it's nothing like Harvest. A lot of fans were expecting the acoustic either after the Gold Rush or Harvest. But this, with Vampire Blues, Ambulance Blues, Revolution Blues, Walk On, became such a cult record, and years later became the magnificent fan-loving record it's become by by Neil Young. I did see Neil Young also around this time, and I guess it would have been '72 with Linda Ronstadt opening up at Winterland. So I saw Neil quite a bit. He would come through, and I'd see him play a lot. One of my favorite band records of 1974 is this. This is a thing people love or hate. This is sort of their bridge album. They were sort of a cult band, and this really pushed them over. Not huge like they'd become the following year, I think. But '74, I saw them. Some of the Winterland, I saw them later, with the spaceships and stuff. I think in '75 or '6 when they played Oakland Coliseum. Jethro Tull opened up then. But seeing them at Winterland, this to me is a perfect record. And I think this is their best record. I just think as an album, start to finish, real drums, even though Jeff Lynne likes that compressed drum sound. Bev Bevan's drums on here are amazing. But it just flows together almost like a, mini rock opera. Fantastic cover, El Dorado by Electric Light Orchestra. Can't Get It Out of My Head was the closest they had for a top single in 1974. But love this record. And then before I take a little break here, too, Fleetwood Mac. Now, this is the record before. This is the record before. This is the record before Buckingham Nicks joined and Fleetwood Mac became this massive hit in 1975. 1974, the last album with Bob Welch. as a quartet. There's one great, I mean, this is a pretty good record. Not a great record, but I do like it. Come a little bit closer. Christy McVie's song is really fun. Heroes Are Hard to Find is a great song, but I really like, is it Silver Heels? Silver Heels? If you could sing like Paul McCartney, get funky like Etta James, I'd never change, I'd never change. Heroes Are Hard to Find, Fleetwood Mac, and of course, you know, we know the self-titled album in 1975, The Rest is History. I did see them at Winterland this tour, 74, right before the big one. Okay, so here's where the Patty Hearst connection comes into play. Patty Hearst, again, was the heiress of the Hearst Corporation, Xanadu, if you know Citizen Kane, loosely based on William Randolph Hearst the first. Hearst Castle down south on the way to Los Angeles, Highway 1. If you go to visit Hearst Castle, an amazing over-the-top place to visit. Hearst newspapers, William Randolph Hearst, William Foster Kane. Coincidence? In February, on February 4th, Patty Hearst was kidnapped in 1974 from her house in Berkeley. Her boyfriend, Stephen Weed, was beat up. There was, you know, rumors that Stephen Weed was involved to try to get money out of the air, but it turned out she was kidnapped by the Sudanese Liberation Army, the SLA. It's a mouthful to say here. And it became one of the big stories of 1974, along with Watergate. She was kidnapped, and then a few months later, on April 15th, 1974, tax day. I wonder if that was planned out. I need to read the book on that, of the story, because it's a fascinating story. Patty Hearst, as Tanya, and some of the members of the SLA held up the Hibernia Bank out in the Sunset District in San Francisco. Famous bank robbery. I assume most of you have seen the picture of Patty Hearst, renamed as the revolutionary Tanya, holding the gun up from the cameras. Such a story, such a Hollywood story. Heiress kidnapped, becomes brainwashed, becomes sexually active with members of the SLA, locked in a closet for a while. There is a movie, an earlier movie with Miranda Richardson from about 25 years ago, which is actually pretty good. I really like that movie. But this was happening. Rolling Stone magazine and KSAN Radio did exposés on it. It was covered, at least in the Bay Area, everywhere. Obviously, the Hearst papers wrote about it. Rolling Stones did a big expose on Patty Hearst, which is an amazing article if you ever find it. I'm blanking out of the writer. One of the great writers of the 70s for Rolling Stone magazine wrote it. It was a multi-issue series on Patty Hearst. So a lot of people didn't know Patty Hearst was brainwashed, if she was willingly an accomplice. That's a whole other story, which I won't get into because it goes beyond 1974. However, Catherine and I were in love. We were young love. Catherine was several years younger than me. I was 19 years old, and I was living at home with my parents, and my parents went away for a weekend. And I think this is an important story, and I'm not going to get into the lurid details of it. However, the reason I remember the date of May 17th of when this event happened is because it was a night of the SLA shootout. The Sudanese Liberation Army, several of them were in Los Angeles, and there was a shootout. The house burned down. One of the members was killed, and there was a whole big assault. And I remember Catherine came over to my house that night, whatever night it was, Friday night, Saturday night. We could look it up, but I didn't. And it was the night of the SLA shootout, and we turned that on a couple of times and saw this. It was like live reporting. It's not like live today in 2020 where everyone's got a cell phone and cameras and news cameras are there. So it was it was a shit show. It was a mess. It was a big deal. And obviously a lot of people initially thought Patty Hearst was in that house and she might have been killed. Obviously she was still in the Bay Area. She was not. But I'm going to bring this album into play. Now, this album is not from 1974. This album is from 1970, I believe. And this is obviously Pink Floyd's album, Metal. One of my all-time favorite Pink Floyd records for a lot of reasons. The only time I saw Pink Floyd was 1973, several months before Dark Side of the Moon came out. And Pink Floyd performed the entire Dark Side of the Moon, which was amazing. We didn't know the music. It's not like now where everyone, you know, and the Wizard of Oz fans know about Dark Side of the Moon. This up till then was probably my favorite Pink Floyd record, although I do like the early records. This is such a spacey record. Now, at the time, I had a Magnafox. I had a record changer, and we all know record changers. You friggin' audiophiles and record people hate the concept of record changes. You would stack records. Remember, this was 1974. I had a record changer, and sometimes when I just wanted to do things and not every 15 minutes flip over the record, I would stack records. So that night I stacked, I don't remember all the records, but I do remember Abbey Road was one of them, and this was one of them. And I had side 2 stacked to play on this, which is the entire side piece of music, Echoes, which is a gorgeous, meandering, just a heroic piece of music and really wonderful. Experimental, avant-garde, proggy, but not overly proggy. I just love it. I think it's a beautiful record. So this is the night Catherine and I lost our virginity. And as the records stacked and played, Echoes was on when I lost my virginity. So this is a very special record for me. Something I remember to this day, playing this record in 1974.
Standing at the crossroads, trying to read the signs to tell me which way I should go to find the answer. And all the time I know, plant your love and let it grow. Let it grow, let it grow. Let it blossom, let it flow.
Yes, the Beatles were still around, and in my mindset, 2 records that came out during my record days in 1974. Well, there were several, but 2 in 74. John Lennon's Walls and Bridges. This was recorded during his weekend, year-long hiatus in Los Angeles. You know it, Walls and Bridges, Number 9 Dream, the album with May Pang, when he had his time away from Yoko. I love this record. I think it's a great record. I'm looking forward to some kind of expanded alternate, because some of the alternates I've heard from this on some of the other CD box sets I have are pretty wonderful. So this, and then Ringo did an album, his follow-up to his first album. Remember, around this time, Ringo, John had his first number 1, only number 1 until his death, single on this, Whatever Gets You Through the Night, with Elton John. And obviously did the performance live in Madison Square Gardens with Elton John when he re-met Yoko and got back together with Yoko. So John Lennon, and of course, Good Night Vienna. Title track is a song, Good Night Vienna, that John wrote especially for Ringo. Great follow-up, had some hit singles again, like Snookeroo, the No No song written by Hoyt Axton. No, 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 I won't no more. Pretty good record, you know. Klaatu Verata Nikto. That's Gort the robot from The Day the Earth Stood Still. So like this record. After this, Ringo's career musically went kind of downhill. It was a lot of the booze, drugs, cocaine, and fast living in LA didn't help things. Hanging out with Keith Moon and Harry Nilsson, and then John Lennon with the famous story when they're all John and Harry Nilsson are at the Troubadour seeing a show. I think it was Smothers Brothers maybe. And John Lennon was shit-faced drunk. He was a bad drunk, and he was being an asshole to the waitress, an obnoxious drunk. He's not a happy drunk. And he cut his head, he went to the bathroom, and he put taped a Kotex to his head to stop the bleeding, and he's out there and he's being obnoxious to this waitress, and the waitress finally they get in a little altercation, or drunk asshole, typical drunk guy asshole John Lennon acted that night. And he says, "Do you know who I am?" And the waitress responds, "Yeah, you're some asshole with a Kotex on your head." Great pictures of him being like just fucked up drunk. So other records that year, the second album by Big Star, obviously another record that failed to chart or failed to do anything. This is one of those records that we play in the store all the time. Occasionally people would bought it, but it wasn't a seller. It wasn't something, this is a later craft reissue. I did have this record, and it went away in my purge of 94. I had seen Lou Reed this year. Going to Winterland, I think that year, bands I saw were Steve Miller, the Kinks, Poco, ZZ Top, Mott the Hoople, the Grateful Dead, Lou Reed, Fleetwood Mac, plus a lot of other artists at the time. But this is an incredible record. The guitar playing on Rock and Roll, and where it morphs from Lady Day, White Light, White Heat, version of Heroin, Sweet Jane. But the guitar playing on this by Dick Wagner and Steve Hunter, incredible record, one of the great live records. And this had a lot of balls, and this got a lot of play for Lou Reed. We sold a lot of this record. I don't think it was a huge hit, but it was a solid catalog seller, Lou Reed. And of course, in that same vein a little bit, David Bowie's Diamond Dog. What a great record. Diamond Dogs, 1984, We Are the Dead. Rebel Rebel was the big single that he had at this time, but I love this record. This is the reissue with the uncensored cover, where he has genitalia. Guy Peart, the artist who painted this, did a Rock and Roll for the Rolling Stones, another album from 1974. So that's here somewhere in the pile. But love that. I was getting, going to college, I was getting turned on to this little, with that whole Lou Reed and David Bowie, that whole little glam stuff had been going on for a while. But this is a band. There was a friend of mine named Kent, that I met at college, and I started meeting some of the guys that lived and women who lived in the dormitories at San Francisco State. Obviously, I was living at home and then moved out. I was a local boy, but I'd go hang out in the dorms, and that was times of dorms with pot smoking and everything, and getting high, listen to records, what you do in college, right? At least in the 70s. Sparks, totally different sound to what I was accustomed to. But we played this in the store too. Come On to My House. This town ain't big enough for the both of us. Love this record. Another artist that I was getting into quite a bit, and we play in the store a lot. The whole, Baby's on Fire, Throw in the Water. We cracked up on that song. Some of the local stations, K-Sound, would play it, but it didn't get a lot of airplay. But Brian Eno, of course, after leaving Roxy Music. But these two records, back to back. Here Comes the Warm Jets and Tiger Mountain by Tiger Mountain, both came out in 1974. Fabulous records. A record that I was disappointed with in 1974. I had been a fan of Procol Harum early on. They're still one of my favorite bands, but the year before, 1973, with Grand Hotel and this, I didn't really love these records when they came out. This is Exotic Birds and Fruit. Fabulous, gorgeous cover. Famous painting, artwork. Love this record now. It took me decades to latch on to Grand Hotel and this. I kind of bought them because of habit, because I could get discounts in record stores. But I didn't really love these records. My taste had moved on to, country rock and glam stuff, obviously like T-Rex, that kind of stuff, and bands like this. I got into Genesis somewhat. From Genesis to Revelation actually was the record that I got after, I think Foxtrot was the first album I got by Genesis. But the one I got into initially was in the year before this, Selling England by the Pound. I used to play that record a lot in 1973, especially in the store. You know, there's records you play in record stores, you just keep putting it on. And I just remember that line, I'm a lawnmower. You can tell by the way I walk on that album. But this album, this is a double album. This is my favorite Genesis album. And I saw them at the Berkeley Community Theater on this tour. It's the only time I saw Genesis. And those of you who watched my channel here know how famously I don't like Phil Collins as a lead singer of Genesis. I kind of dropped off after he left and continued with Peter Gabriel as a solo artist, but not Genesis anymore. Just a thing for me, you know, whatever you're, but another local shows I saw, and I can't remember if it was 74, it might have been 75, at the Paramount Theater, and was Bob Marley and the Wailers. And obviously 73, 72, 73, I was getting into reggae music because of Jimmy Cliff, mostly because of The Harder They Come and Toots and the Maytals' Pressure Drop. But this was the guy. I remember seeing him. Now I can't remember if it was Winterland or the Paramount Theater, but it was one of those moments where we took mushrooms, and I remember the stage bouncing. Hey, let's kind of, I mean, you know, almost 46 years later, I can confess to my wicked ways and my youthful indiscretions of sexual debauchery, drugs, music, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right? That's what it was about. I was careful. I wasn't drinking then. I wasn't drinking hardly at all. I had a beer here and there. Now, of course, you know, Eric Clapton was jumping on the reggae bandwagon. This was a huge record. I like this record. I know some of us have gotten off the Clapton thing. He got a little lazy. He wasn't really playing these great, he wasn't the guitar god anymore in the 70s like he was in the 60s. But this is an amazing record. And I mean, Motherless Children, he was doing all these covers, so he wasn't writing quite as much. Willie and the Hand Drive, of course, I Shot the Sheriff was a huge hit. So I think in a way he was helping contribute to people going and looking for the original, you know, like reggae, or like Paul Simon did with Graceland, George Harrison working with a sitar, people looking towards the original sort of ethnic records and international records and world music from these artists, whatever you want to say about it. This is still a great record, and Yvonne Elliman started playing and touring with him, which I thought was a great vocal addition to Eric Clapton's records. And I got into Yvonne Elliman 1970 she's the original Mary Magdalene in Jesus Christ Superstar. She also recreated that role in the film version, which I'm not a fan of, but she's all over this, and I love this. And of course, Catherine and I pulled another song from this record as our song, and that was Let It Grow, Let It Blossom, Let It Flow. Beautifully romantic, kitschy in a way, but gorgeous. And you know, being young, being in love, you find these little things, these little attachments. And I remember I was getting discounts. I'd bring gifts of records to Catherine because I'd get promos and we'd get tickets, and it was a fun time. So, Eric Clapton. Going a little bit out of order again, I probably should include this with Eno, but this album, oh my God. I got into Roxy music, I think, starting with this record. I had not gotten the previous records until I got this, so I went backwards. This is Country Life. This is their fourth album. Of course, this came out with a green cellophane shrink wrap covering this, and then there was an alternate version with just the bush. I shouldn't that's probably a bad way of saying this, with just without the women, just the shrubbery, I should say. Shrubbery is a little more basically like this on the cover. The Thrill That Evolved, what a great song. Out of the Blue. Phil Manzanero, what a great guitar player. Roxy music. And then, of course, this became a record we played in the store all the time. And this is a promo copy I got, which is really great, on Vertigo, an American Vertigo. This is basically Phonogram, which is part of Polygram. And there's my hole punch to prove that it was a promo copy. I got this as a promo, and I knew nothing about this, but this is an album that started getting a lot of like airplay and a lot of buzz. Fun, ans Autobahn. We all know it now, German, being reissued finally, the whole Kraftwerk catalog. I didn't know much about this type of music. I was getting a little bit into Tangerine Dream. Phaedra by Tangerine Dream was another record I don't have here right now, but came out in 1974. So that kind of, not as, you know, I wouldn't call it krautrock because it wasn't really rock, but beautiful record. I mean, the whole side one of this is Autobahn, the suite in a way. And I would play this. Now, during this time, I became program director at San Francisco State's KSFS radio station. Didn't have a lot of audience, but Brooks and I were on the radio station. I had a DJ slot and was a program director. Of course, you'd call playing Kraftwerk, or go take a piss or go take a dump record because it was so long. Again, this is a time of records. We weren't playing cassettes. We weren't playing carts. Carts we'd play for spots and for certain things, but it was all records. Obviously not CDs. 1974. So I loved being on the radio station. So I would work at the record stores. I probably worked 30 hours a week at the record stores. I was taking 4 classes a semester at this time. My core classes, my broadcasting classes, audio classes, history of broadcasting. I took a lot of film classes. This record was just a part of that. Playing this stuff on the radio, I would start editing these tapes. I would record tapes, make tape loops, record bits and pieces from other records and interviews and mix them together. I'd make these like anywhere from 15-minute to 30-minute montages, and I have to find somewhere I have a reel-to-reel, quarter-inch reel-to-reel tape of some of these literally cut and splice tapes. I'd have to transfer it sometimes. So this was an important record for me to kind of open my, just open myself up to all the other worldly music, electronic music. It was planted the seeds for electronic music for me. Here's that other Guy Pillard art cover, Rolling Stones. You know the record, Only Rock and Roll If You Like It. I believe, this is not the first record, this is the second record with, or the last record. This is the last record maybe with, come on, you know who it is, with Mick Taylor, Nicky Hopkins, Billy Preston, Ray Cooper. Incredible record, I think. Their last great record? I like Black and Blue actually a lot, but I like the Rolling Stones, and I saw them. I saw them several times during tours, starting with in '68 and '69 actually, and then Altamont, and then the great '72 tour at Winterland. Tom Waits, 1974, perfect record. Closing time. I'm sorry, this is a Hardest Saturday Night, and around this time, Asylum Records had a showcase for Tom. There's a place called the Beach Chalet, which is out on the Great Highway in San Francisco, just down the road from the Cliff House, and it faces the Pacific Ocean. And it has these WPA murals, these war murals that were created during World War II. Check out WPA artwork. A lot in California happened in these public buildings, the public artworks buildings. And upstairs was this place you can kind of rent out, which was empty, and now it's a restaurant. But at that time, it was just kind of this empty room, and Island Records had a showcase. They had a piano and one palm tree, and Tom Waits playing piano, playing his songs from this record. And it was an industry only, so people from record stores and radio were there. So I was there late in the year, I believe, with my friend Vernon, and it was so great. There's maybe 100 people at the most, seeing Tom Waits perform solo piano. What a time to see him. The New Coat of Paint it opens up with. It's got Diamonds on the Windshield, The Heart of Saturday Night, which is a beautiful, beautiful record. The Ghost of Saturday Night. You all know Tom Waits, one of the amazing artists of our time. I still believe he's pretty incredible out there. You know, he does what he wants and he has his audience that follows him. Of course, he probably made more money off the Eagles cover of Old 55 than he did on any of his own records. But incredible artist, and I feel very fortunate to have seen him in that small venue in 1974. Another promo I got, and had been into her, but this is an incredible record. Bonnie Raitt, a Warner Brothers record. Of course, it says promo, see? Prove it, prove it. This has, I think, one of the definitive versions of Angel from Montgomery, the John Prine song. So that's all I'm going to say about this. And there's so many more records. God, 1974. So, 1974 was also a great year for two women that just exploded into the scene. Not that they weren't around. They were around. In fact, I would buy all their early records. And 1974, these two women had massively big, huge hits. And they both sort of come from the Southern California singer-songwriters scene to a point, although one is Joni Mitchell from Canada, who moved to Laurel Canyon and Topanga Canyon and just did this massively big record that became a huge hit, Court and Spark. Court and Spark just blew everything away in 1974, one of the biggest records of the year. Of course, Help Me, Free Man in Paris, Raised on Robbery, several hits, including it closes out with a cover version called Twisted, which is from Lambert, Hendricks, and Ross. I did see this tour. She worked with the LA Express, with Tom Scott, and several other artists who would later in the year, at the end of the year, go on to tour, some of them with George Harrison on his debacle of a tour. But I saw her, I think it was Berkeley Community Theater, later in the year, towards the end of the year. I think it was November. Viles, a double album live of that tour came out. Fabulous record by a great artist. Again, obviously her earlier records like Blue and For the Roses are stunningly beautiful records, and actually records I prefer over this. However, this was more commercial, had a little more of a rock band to it, and arrangements that were a little more upbeat, less, intimate, less folky, but incredible record. And obviously her wonderful cover artwork. And the other artist who had been on Capitol Records making some great crossover. I mean, she had a couple of hits with the Stone Pony band, and that is Linda Ronstadt. Linda Ronstadt, this was her last record for Capitol Records, and ironically, the record that really broke her and pushed her over. I had seen her in 72 or 3 at Winterland, opened up for Neil Young. I've always been a fan. She was more of a country rocker, although she did some beautiful, beautiful songs before that. Of course, the big hit with the Stone Ponies of Different Drum, the song written by Mike Nesmith of the Monkees. But this, again, she wasn't a songwriter, but she has an amazing voice. She was a great talent of discovering, of reinterpreting other people's songs. On here is When Will I Be Loved, the great song Phil Everly wrote for the Everly Brothers, as well as You're No Good by Clint Ballard Jr., It Doesn't Matter Anymore. Great, actually a wonderful song by Paul Anka. But she helped other songwriters like the McGarrigle Sisters she covers on here. Later albums, she would cover songs by people like Warren Zevon. In fact, one of her albums, Hasten Down the Wind, is named after a Warren Zevon song. I think she covered 3 or 4 of his records. She became the biggest selling female artist of the 70s, and well-deserved, great interpreter of other people's music, and a great ear for listening to songs that had to kind of work them together. Produced by Peter Asher, who had become her manager and produced all her great Asylum records after this. There was that crossover that the Asylum record came out before this, but she had one more ode to Capitol, and this kind of convoluted story there. There's a great cover of Willin' on here, the great Lowell George song, Little Feat song that was covered by many, many artists. Another artist who defined the 70s, and I'd be remiss to mention Stevie Wonder. I mean, from Inner Visions, Talking Book, Songs in the Key of Life, 4, 5, 6 records in a row. We could not keep these records in stock in the store. They would sell out like nothing else. Stevie Wonder was such a huge, and he had, the straights would buy him, the hipsters would buy him, pop, soul, funk, and just beautiful songwriting. Now, You Are the Sunshine of Your Love became one of those songs, almost like Creedence Rolling on the River, Proud Mary, that you just didn't want to hear for a while. That's not on this album, but this has You Haven't Done Nothing, It Ain't No Use, Smile, Heaven is 10 Zillion Light Years Away, which is a gorgeous song, but Stevie Wonder, 1974. And of course, I would still follow along with the great Leonard Cohen. It's a promo copy I got from Columbia Records during my record store heyday. And it has the great Who by Fire, which is a magnificent song. Now, in the fall of 1974, August, Richard Nixon resigns of the Watergate scandal. Later that fall, after working at the Warehouse Records for a year, Coleman and I and this other guy named Eric, we were asking for a raise. And after a year, we opened our checks and we got a raise. We got a 5-cent an hour raise. We were fucking pissed. It was like, are you fucking kidding me? I think we were getting, was it $2.50, $2.60 an hour? A little above minimum wage, not much, whatever. But you work in a record store to get free records. But we were in college. I was still living at home. And so we basically all quit. We quit that Friday, walked out. Following Monday, literally from Friday to Monday, Coleman gets a job at the infamous Tower Record store at Columbus and Bay. I went to there was a record store chain called the Record Factory, which was more of a hip, smaller chain than the Warehouse. Warehouse was all over California. Record Factory, when I worked for them, originally had about 7 stores. It would grow to have 25, 30 stores, I think. And then years later, it got bought out by the Warehouse. And anyway, that's a whole other story, which I may or may not tell someday. But I liked it. And there was a guy named Steve Countryman who was there, who had worked there and would come in the Warehouse when I worked there and offered me a job twice. Said, why don't you come over and work for us? We got cool. And I'm a loyal person, and I just decided I didn't want to leave. But after walking out the following Monday, I call them up and I go down to the little South of Market headquarters. They had a distributor called Mighty Fine Distributing. Basically, Record Factory had their own distribution outlet where you could go pick up records for all the stores. And other indie stores could buy from Mighty Fine. So Steve worked down there, and I went in, and then I called him. I said, can I come by? I'm looking for work now. And he said, oh, let me look into it and see what stores and, where what city do you want to be in? I said, I want to stay in San Francisco. And a few days later, I don't know how long it was, he calls me and says, there's a store on Irving Street, which is literally a block, Inner Sunset District in San Francisco, a block from Golden Gate Park. Perfect. Talk to the manager, his name is Vernon, and I'll set it up. And so I called up Vernon and said, Steve told me to come talk to you. There was an opening there, because apparently there was an opening there. So I went in an interview, and Vernon was from Richmond, Virginia. Vernon, I had spoken about many times on my videos here. In fact, there's a whole video, please seek it out, called Eulogy. My friend Vernon died last year in 2019, and we've been friends since 1974. Vernon was a little suspicious. I was this young kid, 19 years old, not quite 20. Everyone else was at least 21, 22, 23. A big difference in those days at that period of time. I think he was suspicious that the guy at our quote mini corporate headquarters sent me in. What's this guy? I want to hire who I want to hire. And he started asking me all these questions. And of course, I had an interview in the back room with one of those doors, his office, a really small, tiny manager's office where you do the books every night or next morning, and had a split door where you could open so you could see out into the store. And we were in there, and he asked me what kind of music I liked. And I said, rock and roll, I like psychedelic, I love the Beatles. And then I said country rock, and he goes, oh, country rock, who do you like? And I said the Byrds, Flying Burrito Brothers. That got me the job. Vernon, if you watch these videos and the way I speak of him, he really pushed me and turned me on to roots music, bluegrass, country, the real Louvin Brothers stuff. I knew, I'd seen the name Louvin Brothers on Sweetheart of the Rodeo by the Byrds. I didn't know who they were. I didn't buy the original records yet. But Vernon hired me, and he goes, so anything else you want to say? I said, yeah, can I have some date in November? I said, can I have these 3 days off, these nights? And he got a little pissed at me, I think, at first, because George Harrison was coming to tour. I already had tickets. But these albums are records that I got into because of Vernon, Grievous Angel, Graham Parsons. Now, this came out earlier. I had seen it, but Vernon really turned me on to it. I love Graham Parsons. We all know this record. I didn't know until the following year. I didn't really pay attention to Emmylou Harris on this, but Vernon in 75 got the promo guy at Warner Brothers to give me a copy of the first Emmylou Harris record, and we saw her at the boarding house in San Francisco. But it was amazing that Vernon really kind of latched onto this. No other, I've talked about this record bombed. We played this by Gene Clark in the store all the time. Vernon and I think the following year went to see him at the Berkeley Square, or the Keystone Berkeley, one of the clubs basically in Berkeley, and not many people were there. And we went up to Cotati, which is near Santa Rosa, north of San Francisco, and saw Gene Clark. Loved Gene Clark. Obviously, he was having problems. This record bombed. The record company wouldn't get behind it. It was really unique for Gene Clark, but an incredible record that finally this past year got a huge, massive reissue on 4AD label. Another record we play in this store, which especially side one of this, Robert Palmer. You all know Robert Palmer from the later MTV years with The Dancers, Pressure, Something Irresistible with his women bottles with the lips. But this is my favorite album of his. Part of it is backed by part of Little Feat. Does a lot of Lowell George songs, including Sailing Shoes, Sneakin' Sally Through the Alley. This is an incredible record, Sneakin' Sally Through the Alley, on Island Records, side one of this record. We would play this in the store, in the record factory, all the time. So I get a job. When I finally moved out in early 75, Brooks was my roommate. I got an apartment a block from the store. So I would walk to the store a block away from Judas Street to Irving Street in the inner Sunset. I would go to San Francisco State College. It was a wonderful, exciting time. Working in a record store, going to college. Catherine and I were still going out. In fact, Vernon had a Thanksgiving dinner, and he invited me. He invited all the people from a couple of the record stores. Him and his girlfriend, Pico, had this dinner. They're both from the South, both from the East Coast, and would have a Thanksgiving dinner. And I was young, and I kind of basically went to my parents early, and then I left my parents and went to Vernon's. But when he said, I said, can I bring my girlfriend? He goes, no, there's not enough room. My girlfriend was Catherine. Years later, or actually next year, Catherine and Vernon became huge friends. To the day Vernon died, Catherine was a friend of Vernon's, and all of us, we were mutual friends. And Catherine never let go of Vernon not letting her come to the Thanksgiving, and didn't realize how close we were.
Want to scratch my itch, sweet Annie Rich, and welcome me back to town. Come out on your porch or step into your parlor, and I'll tell you how it all went down. Out with the truckers and the kickers and the cowboy angels, and a good salute in every single town. Oh, and I remembered something you once told me, and I'll be damned if it did not come true. 20,000 roads I went down, 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 and they
grow up with the country, across those prairies with those waves of grain. And I saw my dad.
Another record we play a lot, you know, whatever you want to say about Jackson Browne, this was an incredible record. Breakout record in a lot of ways. Obviously, he had sold records before this, Redneck Friend, and, you know, his first records, Saturate, before using, but Late for the Sky, Fountains of Sorrow, For a Dancer, Before the Deluge. This is a gorgeous record and it holds up today. I love Jackson Browne in this period. He had a great run of records on Asylum Records as well, and he produced and helped push Warren Zevon to get signed to Asylum, produced his first record. Of course, how many times can I show Randy Newman, but Rednecks, incredible record, controversial to a point, but stunningly beautiful songs. Louisiana 1927, They're Gonna Wash Us Away, which, you know, kind of have a sort of resurgence after the 2005 Katrina, what happened in New Orleans. But Rednecks, Roland, Kingfish, Birmingham, great record. Eagles, Ron and Don Henley, great background vocals, great help. Ry Cooder's on here. All the usual suspects from Warner Brothers records. And of course, I continue to be in love with Ry Cooder. This could be my favorite Ry Cooder record, Paradise and Lunch. It closes up, not closes up, but there's a song called Diddy Wah Diddy, which is an old song that he does as a duet with Earl Father Hines. Earl Father Hines is one of the great jazz pianists. Although I don't want to say honky tonk, but God, what's the style he plays? Not ride piano, but not influenced by, well, great piano player. Ironically, because of this, I got into Earl Hines, and I don't remember if it was 74 or 75. Through working at the radio station in San Francisco State, I got to go on this, there was a jazz show done by KQED, the local public broadcasting station, and they did a live show. It was me and this one guy at KQED. I got to know him through KQED, through the broadcasting department at State, and I was his sort of engineer assistant on a live broadcast of Earl Father Hines at the College of Marin. So I got to meet Earl Father Hines, hang out with him all afternoon, in the evening, listen to his performance. But what a great moment that was for me as a 20-year-old young kid recording this great jazz artist. And I wish I had a tape of that still, of Earl Father Hines. But Ry Cooder, this record has one of the few original songs written by Ry Cooder called The Tattler is on this. And Linda Ronstadt also covered The Tattler on one of her records. So she really pioneered these great record makers, but were on the fringe of record sales. So it really probably helped the bottom line. Of course, Little Feat, Lowell George's band with, Bill Payne, a great keyboard player, Sam Clayton percussion, Paul Beret, great guitar player, but Rock and Roll Doctor, Oh Atlanta, which became one of their great songs. Their live record, Waiting for Columbus, that came out after this, is one of the great live records. But Feet Don't Fail Me Now, Spanish Moon, incredible record. I have every single record they made with Lowell George in the band, and a couple after Lowell George died at an early age. One of the great shows I went with Vernon, he got us tickets to, and I went one of the nights at the boarding house, this great place on Bush Street that had roots music, but also had later Talking Heads I'd see there early on, Kinky Friedman, but this came out just in the last couple of years. This is a Sonic Bear Journals, and this is Doc and Merle Watson. They played something like 5 nights in a row at the boarding house, and I went to one. I was getting into roots music. If you don't know Doc Watson, it's a great guitar playing. Doc and Merle, great bluegrass, roots music, country music, incredible. And this is Owsley's live recordings. He would work for the Grateful Dead. He would be the sound engineer for the Grateful Dead. He would make the great Acid. Owsley's Acid was some of the great acid for the Grateful Dead. But this is incredible. Obviously, this only came out in the last few years. but it was kind of great being at one of these shows. I don't remember what night I went, but the boarding house was a great intimate place. And I remember we'd get on the list and get free drinks. And of course, we'd always order, which sounds weird now, this German wine, Liefremilch, because it was like the most expensive thing. And we were on the label's expense account. So we'd order a bottle every show we'd get. We'd probably go to the boarding house once a week for free for these shows. And debut shows like later on, Emmylou Harris and Kinky Friedman, as I said, and Talking Heads, and we'd get a bottle of Liefremilch. Carlene Carter I saw there a couple years later as well. So that was a fun time. I just have two more things I'm closing out with. November of, and actually before we go to that, let's go with this record. This doesn't fit in anywhere else. The Residents. We sold this record, I think it was on consignment. It turns out now, this is one of the most valuable records in my collection. As of this recording in November of 2020, this record is between $450 and $600 on Discogs. The Residents' debut album, obviously a little bit of a cease and desist as a bastardized Meet the Beatles. Avant-garde band, experimental. They did movies live. They did 8mm, 16mm films, electronic, ambient, just bizarre stuff. I'd see them anytime I could in the Bay Area throughout the 70s and 80s into the 90s. Later, they wore those eyeball hats. But on Discogs right now, again, this is up to $600. Only 1,000 copies were pressed. Mine still has a shrink wrap. We sold it for $3.99, so that means I probably got it for about $3 back then. This was 1,000 discs, first pressing February 1974 on Ralph Records. And of course, the George Harrison record that came out, Dark Horse. Dark Horse was a single. George Harrison's voice was croaky, crackly. He was sick. He should have waited to record this record, in my opinion. There's a great song called Ding Dong, Ding Dong that I play every New Year's Eve on here. And I quite like the songs on here. Far East Man, It Is He, Jai Shri Krishna. They do a cover of Bye Bye Love, which is a weird version of the Everly Brothers song. Maya Love, Simply Shady, So Sad. So Sad would be covered by Mylan LaFrey, I'm blanking out, and Alvin Lee from 10 Years After on their album. Great song. He should have waited. He did the tour. I saw 3 of the shows, 2 at the Cow Palace, 1 at the Oakland Coliseum, so I went all 3 nights. He played in the Bay Area. I had a small cassette recorder, and one night I recorded, so I played that tape forever. I can't find that tape, it's somewhere. But his voice was gone. What was great, Ravi Shankar did a set, opened up, which I loved. Some people didn't like, but I loved him having Ravi Shankar open up on this tour. But I finally saw a Beatle. This was the first Beatle I saw live, 1974. Incredible. I did love the show because it was so emotional seeing the Beatle. Unfortunately, I wish George's voice, I wish he kind of waited until his voice got back to normal. He would later go on to switch and leave Capitol Records and Apple and start Dark Horse Records with Warner Brothers. Well, Leo, let's say we promenade through the park. That's George Harrison and Peter Sellers in Frere Park. 1974, Vernon, Coleman, Brooks, Catherine, Turning 20, Records, Patty Hearst, Richard Nixon resigning. He took the high road at the end slightly, you know. He understood what the writing on the wall was, unlike some other presidents we've had that, to me, are disgraceful. Anyway, I really appreciate you watching. Please subscribe if you got through this whole video. Even if you haven't, I know a lot of people, my viewers or subscribers have watched these videos that aren't. Just click the subscribe button, and there's a lot of these. There's a whole playlist of several playlists, including this Memories of a Vinyl Junkie, and these are almost like my personal therapy that I'm leaving for my son someday. It's ramblings of Maslov, But this stuff means a lot to me, and all this music bookmarks my life, and it's something I feel I have to do right now as I grow old. Let it grow, let it blossom, let it flow. Mazzy loves you.
Woo! Bounce back. Jam. Your boy is back. I know y'all miss the bounce. Need to bounce with sexy, you know. Let's get it in. Yeah, your dude is back. Maybach roof is back. Tell the whole world the truth is back. You ain't gotta argue about who can rap, cause the proof is back. Just go through my raps. New York, New York. Yeah, where my troopers at?